Eddie Murphy's early life began in the kind of environment where stability was rare and adaptability was essential. Raised in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, he entered a world shaped by working-class struggle, family tension, and constant change. His father worked as a transit police officer and also performed comedy on the side, while his mother held steady employment as a telephone operator. That contrast between discipline and expression quietly shaped Eddie's understanding of performance long before he ever stepped on stage. When his father died during Eddie's childhood, the loss created an emotional fracture that never fully closed. Not long after, his mother's health struggles led to periods of separation from home, placing Eddie and his brother into foster care temporarily. Those experiences introduced him early to instability, silence, and observation as survival tools. Instead of withdrawing, he developed an instinct for reading people, mimicking voices, and turning tension into humor. Laughter became less of a pastime and more of a shield. In spaces where control was limited, comedy gave him a sense of agency. Even as a child, he was not simply reacting to hardship, he was translating it into rhythm, timing, and character, building the foundation of a voice that would later define an era of entertainment. The making of a young performer in Long Island. When stability eventually returned, Eddie Murphy's life shifted to Roosevelt, Long Island, where his mother rebuilt a household structure after years of disruption. The environment was calmer, but the psychological imprint of earlier hardship remained. At school, Eddie was not defined by academic excellence, but by social presence. He learned how to command attention without authority, how to shape silence before delivering a line, and how to turn ordinary moments into performances. Teachers and classmates began to recognize that he had an unusual sense of timing, an ability to read a room instinctively. This was not yet ambition in the formal sense, but something closer to necessity. At home and in public spaces, humor became a way to connect and protect himself simultaneously. By adolescence, he was already experimenting with impressions and voices, observing entertainers, and translating them into his own style. What made him distinct was not just mimicry, but interpretation. He was not copying people, he was rebuilding them through his perspective. The early signs of his future career were already visible, though not yet organized into a path. Performance was still informal, but the emotional engine behind it was fully formed, driven by memory, adaptation, and the need to remain visible in a world that often felt unpredictable. The first stage and the discovery of presence. Eddie Murphy's entry into live performance did not arrive with certainty but with curiosity and urgency. As a teenager, he participated in local talent shows, where the stage became a testing ground for identity. One of his early performances involved singing impersonations, where he stepped into character rather than simply presenting himself. The response from audiences revealed something critical. His presence could shift the emotional temperature of a room. That feedback loop between performer and audience became addictive in a constructive sense, reinforcing his desire to refine the craft. He was not yet focused on fame. He was focused on effect. Every laugh validated not just his skill but his sense of existence. Outside those moments, life remained modest and sometimes financially strained, requiring him to take small jobs and travel into Manhattan to observe and participate in comedy clubs. The journey itself became part of his education, exposing him to professional comedians, harsh crowds, and the competitive rhythm of stand-up culture. He learned quickly that performance required resilience as much as talent. Failure was not theoretical, it was immediate and audible. But so was success, and that clarity shaped his persistence. The stage stopped being a hobby and became a direction, even before he fully understood where it might lead, breaking through in a demanding industry. By the time Eddie Murphy reached late adolescence, he had begun circulating in professional comedy spaces in New York City. Clubs were not welcoming environments by default, they were testing grounds where experience often outweighed talent. Yet his material, delivery, and presence began to distinguish him from many of his peers. The defining shift came when he was given opportunities in larger platforms, eventually leading to his breakthrough on national television. His arrival in the comedy landscape coincided with a transitional period in entertainment, where television was reshaping cultural reach. When he appeared on a major sketch comedy show, his impact was immediate and undeniable. Characters, impressions, and original personas came together in a way that felt both controlled and instinctive. Audiences responded not just to humor but to energy, as if a new frequency had entered the format. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure intensified. Live television demanded precision under constraints that left little room for error. Eddie adapted quickly, treating each performance as both risk and opportunity. The recognition he received was not gradual. It expanded rapidly, transforming him from a young performer into a central figure in a widely watched cultural platform. That acceleration changed everything about the trajectory of his life. Cinema, stardom, and the weight of visibility. Transitioning from television to film, Eddie Murphy entered a phase where his presence became globally recognizable. Early films established him as a leading actor capable of carrying both comedy and narrative structure. His performances combined charisma with improvisational rhythm, creating characters that felt larger than scripted material. As box office success accumulated, so did expectations. He was no longer just performing roles, he was shaping industry standards. Films that followed reinforced his dominance in entertainment, turning him into one of the most bankable stars of his era. However, visibility carried its own burden. The expansion of fame meant reduced privacy and increased pressure to consistently deliver success. The pace of production and public attention left limited space for personal reflection. Even moments of achievement were quickly absorbed into the next demand. Inside this momentum, the separation between public identity and private self began to widen. Eddie Murphy became a symbol of success, but symbols often leave little room for complexity. The industry celebrated his ability to entertain, yet the emotional cost of maintaining that position remained largely unseen. Beneath the laughter and accolades was a life adjusting to constant observation, where even rest existed in fragments between commitments and expectations. Personal life, love, and the search for stability. As his career expanded, Eddie Murphy's personal life moved through phases of connection, separation, and reinvention. Relationships during this period reflected both genuine affection and the structural challenges of fame. Marriage and fatherhood introduced new dimensions of responsibility, shifting his focus from individual ambition to family presence. His home life, particularly during periods of marriage, offered moments of grounding that contrasted sharply with public intensity. Children brought structure and emotional clarity, anchoring him in experiences that were not mediated by performance. Yet the demands of career often conflicted with domestic presence. Travel, filming schedules, and public obligations created distance that could not always be bridged. Over time, these pressures contributed to emotional strain within relationships. Despite the separations that followed, his connection to his children remained central. Fatherhood became one of the most consistent roles in his life, even as romantic relationships changed. Each partnership contributed lessons about communication, timing, and the difficulty of balancing personal identity with public expectation. Rather than simple narratives of success or failure, his relationships reflected the complexity of maintaining intimacy under extraordinary external pressure. Through it all, he continued to evolve, not by avoiding change, but by moving through it. Reinvention through comedy and voice. Even as personal and professional challenges evolved, Eddie Murphy continued to reinvent his creative identity. Returning to character-driven comedy, he demonstrated a unique ability to embody multiple personas within a single work, showcasing both technical skill and emotional range. This phase of his career highlighted his versatility, allowing him to step beyond traditional stand-up or leading man roles. Voice acting further expanded his reach, introducing him to new audiences and generations. In animated storytelling, his vocal performances carried distinct personality and emotional clarity, proving that his influence extended beyond physical presence. At the same time, critical reception varied across projects, reflecting the unpredictable nature of long-term careers in entertainment. Some works were celebrated, while others received mixed responses, yet his relevance persisted. Reinvention became a defining pattern, not as a deliberate strategy but as an ongoing response to changing cultural landscapes. Rather than remaining fixed in one era of success, he adapted repeatedly, finding new ways to contribute creatively. This adaptability reinforced his longevity in an industry known for rapid turnover. Through voice, character, and performance, he maintained a connection to audiences that had followed him across decades, even as the nature of entertainment continued to evolve. Later career reflection and recognition. As time progressed, Eddie Murphy's career entered a phase of reflection and recognition. Awards and honors began to acknowledge not only individual performances, but the broader impact of his contributions to entertainment. These recognitions served as markers of influence, rather than endpoints of achievement. Returning to earlier platforms later in life carried symbolic weight, representing both continuity and closure. Appearances in contemporary projects demonstrated that his creative relevance had not diminished, even as the industry shifted around him. Instead of pursuing constant visibility, he became more selective, focusing on projects that aligned with personal interest and artistic value. This shift reflected a broader change in perspective, where success was no longer measured solely by scale but by meaning. Public perception also matured, with audiences revisiting earlier work through a historical lens. What once was immediate entertainment became part of cultural memory. In this stage of his career, Eddie Murphy was no longer defined by novelty or emergence, but by endurance. His presence in entertainment history became less about individual moments and more about sustained influence across generations of film, television, and comedy. Private growth and the reordering of priorities. Beyond public recognition, Eddie Murphy's later years reflect a quieter form of development, centered on family, stability, and personal balance. Fatherhood remained a central focus, with attention distributed across multiple children and evolving responsibilities. Unlike earlier phases of life defined by constant motion, this period emphasized presence and consistency. Relationships became more measured, shaped by experience rather than urgency. The intensity of earlier fame gave way to a more structured and private rhythm. Living away from constant media focus allowed for reflection on earlier decisions, not as regret, but as understanding. He often appeared more selective in interviews and public appearances, prioritizing privacy over exposure. This shift did not represent withdrawal, but recalibration. The demands of fame were no longer the organizing principle of daily life. Instead, family interactions, personal routines, and long-term stability took precedence. In this context, success was redefined internally rather than externally. The focus moved from expansion to sustainability. What emerged was a version of life that prioritized emotional steadiness over public validation, allowing space for experiences that were not shaped by audience expectation or industry pressure. Enduring legacy and the meaning of longevity. Eddie Murphy's legacy is not defined solely by individual films or performances, but by the breadth of his influence across comedy, film, and cultural representation. He emerged from a background of instability and transformed it into a career that reshaped expectations of what a performer could achieve across multiple mediums. His ability to transition between stand-up, sketch comedy, film acting, and voice work demonstrates a rare versatility that has influenced generations of entertainers. Beyond technical skill, his presence in entertainment history represents a shift in visibility and opportunity within mainstream media. Over time, his work has become part of a broader cultural archive, revisited by audiences who span different eras. Longevity in his case is not only about duration but adaptation, the ability to remain relevant as formats, audiences, and industries change. While public attention has shifted across decades, his foundational impact remains consistent. He occupies a space where influence is measured not only by awards or revenue, but by recognition of creative range and resilience. In this sense, his career becomes a study in endurance, within a constantly evolving artistic landscape. Conclusion of a life shaped by performance and persistence. Eddie Murphy's journey reflects a life built through continuous adaptation, shaped by early hardship, rapid success, personal complexity, and long-term reinvention. From the streets of Brooklyn to global stages and cinematic dominance, his path demonstrates how talent interacts with circumstance and persistence. What began as a coping mechanism in childhood evolved into one of the most influential entertainment careers of modern times. Yet, beneath the public narrative lies a more private story of balancing identity, family, and the pressures of visibility. Over time, the urgency of early fame gave way to reflection and stability, allowing space for quieter forms of fulfillment. His legacy is neither static nor complete. It continues to evolve as new generations encounter his work. The significance of his career lies not only in what he achieved, but in how he sustained relevance across changing cultural landscapes. In the end, his story is less about singular triumphs and more about endurance through transformation. It illustrates how laughter, initially born from necessity, can expand into a lifelong language that connects experience, resilience, and expression across decades of change.